All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into another juicy topic. Today, we're tackling something that's been around, well, basically forever. As old as money itself, they say. Inflation.
Oh yeah, inflation. It's everywhere you turn these days. Headlines, news feeds, you can't escape it.
Exactly. But how much do we really understand about inflation beyond, prices go up? What's the real story behind those rising numbers? And more importantly, what does it all mean for our wallets? That's what we're digging into today.
It's about time, right? Because it's more than just noticing your weekly grocery bill getting bigger or gas prices making you wince at the pump. We're talking about a real shift in the, how do I put it, the buying power of your money.
It's like our money is secretly shrinking in the bank, right? No wonder everyone's freaking out. So let's break it down. What are the main forces at play here? It's got to be more complicated than just blaming it on, like, greedy corporations or whatever, right?
Oh, absolutely. Way more nuanced than that.
Right.
See, one of the big players in this whole inflation game is something called cost-push inflation.
Okay, cost-push inflation. Lay it on me.
So picture this. The cost of actually producing stuff, I'm talking raw materials, labor, you name it, that cost starts going up. And what happens? Well, businesses, they got to protect their bottom line, right? So they pass those increased costs right on to us, the consumers. And how do they do that?
Price hikes. I knew it. Everything's getting more expensive.
Exactly. And you know what plays a huge EE role in all of this? Oil.
Ah, oil. Had a feeling that was coming. Gas prices are brutal these days.
It's like oil is the puppet master behind so many price tags. Think about it. It's used in producing and transporting, well, almost everything. So naturally, when the price of oil jumps, it triggers this ripple effect across the entire economy.
Right, because higher transportation costs. Well, that means pricier groceries, more expensive clothes. Basically, everything we buy costs more. It's a domino effect.
Exactly. And then on top of that, we've got another inflation heavyweight to wrestle with. Demand pull inflation.
Demand pull. Okay, is this where we talk about too much money chasing too few goods? Like that whole supply and demand thing we learned back in school?
You got it. When everyone's got more money to spend, maybe thanks to government spending or tax cuts, they're suddenly eager to buy, well, everything. The latest gadgets, trendy clothes, you name it. But here's the catch. There's often not enough to go around.
And when everyone wants something but it's in short supply, prices skyrocket. I've seen it happen firsthand. Remember that whole frenzy over those limited edition sneakers last year? Crazy.
Exactly. A perfect example. And then, of course, we can't forget about the elephant in the room when it comes to inflation printing more money.
Yes. The money printer goes brr scenario.
Right. And our source had a pretty strong take on this one, comparing it to, get this, shooting yourself in the foot.
Ouch. Okay, maybe a little dramatic, but I get the point.
They have a point, though. Because when central banks crank up the money printing presses too quickly, usually to boost a struggling economy or tackle debts, it can backfire and actually fuel inflation if they're not super careful. Think of it like this. The more money floating around out there, the less each individual dollar, euro, or pound is actually worth. It's like diluting a precious liquid.
Too much of a good thing, huh? And speaking of situations that aren't so good, our source brought up a pretty scary example of what happens when inflation spirals completely out of control. Venezuela.
Yeah, definitely a cautionary tale.
We don't have to get into the nitty-gritty details here.
Yeah.
But let's just say it's a stark reminder that inflation, well, it's not something to be taken lightly.
Absolutely not. Venezuela's experience really highlights that the impact of inflation isn't always so black and white. It's not as simple as just saying, inflation is bad, and leaving it at that.
Right. It's like, on the one hand, we hear these horror stories of hyperinflation wreaking havoc on entire countries. But then on the other hand, we've got economists saying that a little bit of inflation can actually be a good thing for economic growth. So which is it? Is inflation friend or foe? It's so confusing. Everyone seems to have a different opinion on inflation. Is a little bit good? Is any amount bad? How do we make sense of it all?
Well, you've hit on a key point there. It's all about context. It's not really a black and white issue of good versus bad, but rather finding that balance.
Balance, okay. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, because our research actually points out that a small amount of inflation, like around that 2% figure you hear economists mention, can actually be a sign of a healthy economy. It usually means businesses are doing well, people are spending, and ideally, wages are increasing too to keep pace with those rising prices. The real trouble starts when prices are shooting up faster than your income. That's when things get painful.
Right, because then it's like you're working just as hard, but your paycheck just doesn't stretch as far anymore.
Exactly. And speaking of things not stretching as far, let's talk about what inflation does to our savings. This is the part where it gets a little, well, not so fun.
Yeah, I had a feeling this was coming. Not exactly a happy topic, but we got to talk about it.
Right, because inflation has this sneaky way of silently eating away at the value of our savings over time.
It's like a wealth-munching monster hiding under our beds. Okay, I'm being dramatic, but you get the point.
I do, I do. And it's why understanding this is so important. See, you might have worked hard and saved up, say, $10,000, which is awesome. But even with what seems like a small, manageable inflation rate of, let's say, 3% per year.
That seemingly small percentage can still pack a punch.
Oh, absolutely. Because in just 1 year, that $10,000 you had, well, it'll only buy you the same amount of stuff as $9,700 would have last year.
Whoa, I never thought about it like that. It's like this hidden tax on our hard-earned money. No wonder everyone's looking for ways to, protect themselves.
Exactly. It really highlights why simply saving money, even diligently, isn't always enough. You've got to think about investing it in assets that have the potential to actually grow faster than inflation is eating away at it. Things like, well, stocks, real estate, maybe certain commodities. It all depends on your individual circumstances and risk tolerance, of course.
Always got to remember that part. Not one-size-fits-all advice. That actually reminds me, maybe we should do a future deep dive on some of those investment strategies for beating inflation. But before we get completely sidetracked, there's one more thing in our research that caught my eye. I have to admit, it kind of left me scratching my head a bit. Deflation.
Ah, yes, deflation. It's like the lesser known but potentially even more troublesome cousin of inflation.
Because while most people I know dread rising prices, it turns out that falling prices, deflation, can actually be even worse for an economy overall. Okay, my brain needs a minute to catch up. Explain it to me like I'm 5. Why is deflation such a big deal?
Okay, imagine this. You're eyeing that fancy new phone, right? But you know prices have been steadily dropping. What do?
I wait a few months to see if I can snag it for even cheaper. Guilty as charged.
Exactly. And that right there is the problem. That hesitation to spend becomes super widespread during deflation, and it sets off this whole chain reaction. Demand drops, businesses start struggling, people lose their jobs.
And then that leads to even lower prices, which just perpetuates the whole cycle. Ugh, talk about a downward spiral.
Right, so it really seems like the key with inflation is finding that Goldilocks zone.
Not too hot, not too cold, just right.
Exactly. Striking that perfect balance. It's honestly one of the biggest challenges facing economists and policymakers globally.
So we've really journeyed deep into the heart of inflation today, haven't we? What it is, where it comes from, those pesky price hikes we all see, and even that deflation thing, which honestly kind of blew my mind a little.
Yeah, deflation is one of those things that sounds kind of good at first, but then you realize, whoa, it can actually make things a whole lot worse.
Right. It's like that saying, be careful what you wish for, because sometimes lower prices aren't actually a good thing for anyone in the long run. But what's really stood out to me today is how this whole inflation thing, it's not just some abstract economic theory. It's impacting all of us every single day.
It's woven into the fabric of our lives. It affects how much our morning coffee costs, what we can afford at the grocery store, even our long-term savings goals.
Exactly. It's easy to just glaze over those headlines about rising inflation or whatever. But at the end of the day, understanding this stuff, it's empowering. It helps us make smarter choices for our own financial lives.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, as they say. And it makes me think about something we touched on earlier about how that small, manageable inflation rate, like around 2%, can actually be a sign of a healthy economy. But it begs the question, who decides what that ideal rate is? And how do we ensure everyone benefits from that economic growth?
Ooh, now those are some seriously thought-provoking questions to ponder. It's like this whole inflation conversation is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? Always more to learn and explore.
Always. And that's the beauty of economics, right? It's complex, it's dynamic, and it's always relevant to our lives.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, listeners, as you go about your day, keep that in mind. Next time you see a headline about inflation, interest rates, or the economy in general, don't just scroll on by. Take a moment to really think about it, question what you read, and stay informed. It's your financial future after all. That's all for today's deep dive, folks. Until next time.